Welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Vanessa Rose. So happy that you decided to tune in and join us for another great edition today. Today, we are very happy to be joined by Robert Irvin Brown, and he is an attorney with Ridenour, Heighton, and Lewis. Thank you so much for joining us, Robert.
Thank you, Vanessa. Please call me Bob.
Oh, well, thank you. I will do that, although Robert's a great name. So thank you for joining us today. And before we get started talking, you might want to grab a pen and paper, because we have some very interesting information to share with people today that can be really helpful to you if you want to start a nonprofit or a charity or a ministry. That's actually what you do. You're an attorney that practices with those. If you could tell our viewing audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. This October, I will complete 39 years in practice in Arizona.
Wow.
It went by pretty quickly. I spent my first 5 years doing litigation defense work for big insurance companies, moved into the real estate department, became certified as a specialist in real estate law, and about 15 or 16 years ago, gradually began doing more and more work for nonprofit organizations, including the hospitals in Sun City and Sun City West and their associated real estate companies, to the extent that today I now head the nonprofit practice group at Ridenour, Heighton, and Lewis, which I started about 2 years ago. We have 4 lawyers, and our goal is to serve our faith-based ministries primarily, although we do serve secular charities as well.
Wonderful. So you've been in the state of Arizona for a long time then?
June 1st, 1974. I left Laramie, Wyoming, where I graduated from law school, with all my worldly possessions in a U-Haul trailer, never to return.
Wow. Well, I'm sure you've seen Arizona change a lot then. So it's definitely grown a lot since 74. But thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and for sharing this great information we're going to cover with our viewing audience. And for you at home, today we are covering civic affairs. And our first topic is how to start a nonprofit. But before we even get into how to start one, what is a nonprofit?
Great question. Nonprofits can come in a number of different forms. Let's start with the basics. When we think about creating an artificial legal person, we think usually about a corporation, or it could be a limited liability company. To do that, you go to a set of blue books that are called Arizona Revised Statutes, and those are the laws that have been passed by the Arizona legislature and signed into law by the governor usually. And Chapter 10 of those books provides the directions for creating a corporation. You file articles of incorporation with the Arizona Corporation Commission. Their technicians check to make sure you filled out all the information correctly, stamp it approved, and then send it back to you. It's then published with a newspaper in the county where the company is headquartered, and voila, a corporation has been born. That can be in 2 kinds, either for-profit or non-profit for our purpose. If we're trying to do a charitable organization, or a nonprofit as they're commonly called, we would check the box that says nonprofit. We're halfway home. Now we've got a corporation, and by the way, the principal purpose for having a corporation is to protect the assets of the officers, directors, shareholders, and employees against charges against their personal assets for debts arising from the operation of the company. So the whole idea of a corporation is the corporate shield, and that idea is to allow our society felt that it was a good idea to encourage creation of new businesses and new charities, and to encourage that, we would say to people, look, you don't have to risk all your personal wealth to start a new company.
So if something happens with that company, the people that started the company aren't liable for what happened with the company?
That's right. Okay. That's the essence of the doctrine of a limited liability, or often called the corporate shield.
So then you have the corporate shield, but then what would be the benefit of a nonprofit?
Aha. Well, if we want to get the benefit of a nonprofit, and that is that in the classic sense, it's the ability to receive tax-deductible donations. And that means that if you give $1 to your church, for example, you can then turn around, if you're in a 35% tax bracket, and deduct 35 cents off your tax. So in effect, when you give $1 to your church, how much do you really give?
Well, see, I feel like I'm cheating because I know the answer because you told me this earlier, but I didn't know. So that's very interesting. Whenever you give $1, I'm sure you at home probably don't know that answer either, but you're not actually giving $1.
you're really giving 65 cents if you're in that tax bracket, because the IRS gives you 35 cents back off your taxes. So then, in effect, the long arm reaches out of your church's treasury over into the United States Treasury, pulls out 35 cents. So we all know what goes along with government money is government regulation.
Yes.
Well, in the best tradition of the United States government, they regulate the entire dollar, not just the 35 cents. So we might think it's God's money in the church, but the IRS really thinks it's government money.
It's their money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so why that's important is, let's say we were going to start a church. Well, we would first form a corporation, typically, under Arizona law. Then, if we're a church, you automatically qualify under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code as a charitable organization. So you don't have to file any more paperwork with the government, typically. And there's a whole different set of books called the Internal Revenue Code, and they were passed by the United States Congress. And so that's where we have to look when we have questions about charitable organizations.
So whenever you start a nonprofit, so I was going to ask, how does somebody start one? You first have to go through the state, and then you have to go to federal. So it's a two-step process.
Correct, and that's the typical form would be to start either a corporation or a limited liability company, and then if you're not a church, let's say you're some sort of other charity or parachurch ministry like a food bank or the Red Cross or something like that, you would then look up the rules and regulations in the Internal Revenue Code under Section 501c3. Typically, by the way, there are 20-plus types of 501c organizations. It can be 501c1, C2, C3, C4.
Really? Are they all nonprofits?
They're all versions of charitable organizations,
interesting.
which is actually the correct technical term.
Okay.
The nonprofit word actually comes from Arizona's corporate code, but charitable organization is the word that's primarily seen in the Internal Revenue Code. So let's ignore all the other 501c subtypes and just talk about 501c3. If you're not a church, but you still want to qualify under 501c3, you fill out a document called a Form 1023, which is a fairly lengthy undertaking. If you've never done it before, it's like starting a new hobby. You can do it yourself. The average group that tries that will have that form rejected between 3 and 6 times before the government finally approves it. You ask the Tea Party if you have any questions about that. And
they might have had to do it a few more times than
they
that.
might have had a little more trouble in the normal group, but anyway, it's pretty technical. So we normally recommend hiring either a tax lawyer or a CPA who does a lot of that. And so they fill out your Form 1023, send in a check for, I don't know, it's close to $900 in federal filing fees. Then the IRS takes somewhere now, because of the sequester, it's taking, I think, between 6 months and a year to get those forms approved. If they're filled out properly, then the government will stamp them approved, and they will send you a letter called a determination letter. That's the official letter from the IRS which says, we have determined that you are qualified as a charitable organization to receive tax-deductible donations. And if they didn't like your application, they will either call you on the phone or send you letters back saying, we need more information, this answer is wrong, or whatever.
Now, if you start a charitable organization and through a 501c3 through government, is there a certain amount of funds that you would receive that have to be used towards something? Or is that something that they don't really regulate once you are approved?
Well, let me reframe your question slightly.
Okay.
One of the key documents is the document that's called the Articles of Incorporation, and that's, remember, it's what we filed with the Arizona Corporation Commission. And right near the top of that document is a paragraph called the Purpose Clause, and that's where you've defined what this corporation is legally authorized to do. So, for example, if you said, this corporation is formed to send food to the orphans in Haiti, period, then that's the only thing that corporation can legally do. You could probably take that corporation, go ahead and file a Form 1023 and get approved by the IRS as a charitable organization. 501c3 organizations are basically for charitable, educational, or religious purposes, and clearly this would be a charitable purpose. And so you'd be good to go, except if you then decided you were, instead of sending food to the orphans in Haiti, you were going to build a church in South America, you'd be outside your purpose, you'd be outside your approved IRS determination letter, and you'd have a problem.
Wow. Okay. So that's something, it's very specific then.
It can be, or
Okay.
if it was done by professionals
Okay.
who have already made that mistake once,
Or twice.
they will write the purpose clause more broadly.
Okay, so that way it's a bigger umbrella so that you don't come back and get in trouble with the
Exactly.
government.
And that's a classic example of why we recommend that you don't try this at home.
Yes.
Get some professional advice, because there are traps all along the way.
You don't want trouble later. You don't want to be in trouble
Well,
with the
actually,
IRS.
I think some attorneys and accountants like it when you do it yourself first, because it costs more to undo it later.
To undo it and to fix the problem, yes. How do people, if they do have a charitable organization, how do they receive tax-deductible donations? How does that process work?
Well, the actual tax-deductible donations, your organization has to go out and solicit them, and basically persuade people through your appeal to write a check to your organization. Then your organization must, according to the IRS rules and regulations, send a donor acknowledgement letter acknowledging the gift, and that letter has very specific language that must be included in it. And if you fail to put that in, you can lose the donation.
Okay. So interesting. So many things to learn about nonprofit. I know that your information has been at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions, there's lots of people that can help you, but I know that Bob would also be more than happy to answer any questions you have. I hope that this has been educational for you. We will be right back after this short 30-second message.